We are in the book of Matthew, chapter 14. We left off right before Jesus feeds the 5,000, or the 5,000 men. We won't march around Jericho, Billy. We're just going to go right into it and shout. Brother Roger Lane was telling us the other day, he said he liked class. I don't remember what night, but he said, he said, you didn't march around Jericho, you just right in. And Billy really liked that way too much. So Matthew chapter 14, picking up, as I said, the section kind of begins at verse 13, and it's going to go through 21. 13 and 14 kind of deal specifically with he goes into a desert place, is the way the King James records it. And again, we pointed out last week, that just means we might say out in the middle of nowhere, or deserted might be a better way to word that. It doesn't mean, a desert like, waterless necessarily. So the people hear about, they find out that he's gone, so they're going to follow him on foot. He goes forth, he sees a great multitude, he's moved with compassion, and he healed their sick. And so, of course, we were kind of running out of time. We got there last week, but I just did want to point out that there's a lesson there for us about having compassion on others. Jesus has compassion. It's that funny-sounding Greek word, splanchnizomai, and so, that knot in the gut feeling when you can do something and you're just not going to be at peace until you do what you can and help out. And that's what Jesus oftentimes did. He did miracles. The miracles were primarily for confirmation that he was, in fact, God in the flesh, the Son of God, the Messiah, the chosen one, or the prophesied one. The anointed literally is what the word Christos or Messiah means. But he also did miracles because many times he had compassion on people, and he knew he had it in his power to help, and so he did. And so we need to have compassion on others. We need to show concern for their spiritual needs, and that's everything we pointed out numerous times. I like what Rob Whitaker says. Everything's done with an eye toward evangelism, but at the same time, we ought to have compassion on people and help out with physical needs as well. It's again, it's all with an eye toward, and I've even sometimes told people that here at the building. Look, we're if we can help you in a physical way, we're happy to do that, and we certainly want to do that. But our biggest concern is to help you spiritually, and that's what it's all about. But Jesus did help people. He showed concern for physical needs and spiritual needs. Now, when you get into verse 15, it's kind of begins this section proper, I suppose, on dealing with feeding the 5,000 men. It's evening time, we might say, getting toward supper time. So the disciples come to him and they say, this is a desert place, again, deserted. And the time is now past. Look, it's past supper time. Send the multitude away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. I've kind of wondered before if, reading this account, if maybe they're thinking like, hey, we're hungry too. Send them away because we want to go get something to eat. And all these people around. Trying to remember, it was Brother Brinkley we were listening on the way home from the hockey rink. I think it was maybe last Tuesday. And Brinkley we were listening to a sermon by Brother Brinkley, and he was talking about this fellow that he went to visit some of the members, this preacher, and said he stayed and he stayed and he stayed, and it gets to be supper time, and he's just still there, and he keeps kind of thinking to himself, well, man, I sort of thought getting on supper time maybe they might offer to feed me or something, but he finally gave up on that. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, and so he'd gotten, it was in the city, and he'd used city transportation, I guess subway or something like that, and so he says something about, well, I guess it's getting late. I better ease on. They said okay, and so he says to the man of the house, he says, well, did you want to walk with me down to the station? And he says, better not. I got some things to do. What about your son? Young man, you want to walk me down the station? He says, oh, no. Mama says as soon as you leave, we're going to eat. So I wonder if maybe the apostles are thinking that, as soon as they leave, we can eat. But anyway, so Jesus says to them, verse 16, they need not depart. You give them something to eat. And so, you could kind of see the disciples here going, Lord? They don't know how many there are at this point, but they're kind of thinking, a lot of people here. I mean, when we get our auditorium packed full, 300-400, I would say. I don't know if you could fit 400 comfortably, but no, not comfortably. But it's a lot. What is? I'm trying to think. 5,000, maybe a small stadium would probably hold something like that. That's a lot of people. So even though they don't have a count at this point, they're looking out and they're going like, Lord, you want us to feed them? How exactly are we supposed to make that happen? So they say, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, I pointed this out last week, but other than the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, this is the only miracle recorded in all 4 gospel accounts. A lot of times, John would choose to record different material, and it's if it weren't so serious, it'd be hilarious to listen to some liberal commentators talk about why John leaves out some things, includes some, he leaves out some things that are in this, what we call the synoptics, and he includes things that are not. Almost as if poor old John, he just never had read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's just ridiculous. It's all an attempt to deny inspiration. But John wrote much later, obviously, when he wrote his gospel account, and so he purposely, and really the Holy Spirit through John purposely, is including a lot of new material to supplement the synoptics, as we call them. But sometimes there would be things included that were, and that generally you would think would tell us. We're never told exactly like, oh, this is included in all 4 because it's so important. But it would tell us that at least it was something of such import that the Holy Spirit saw fit to include it in all 4 gospel accounts. So they say, and it is, not to be too hard on the disciples here, Jesus says, well, give them something to eat. Yeah, you're right. It's past supper time, so feed them. And they're kind of thinking, okay, well, what do you want us to do? And, well, I mean, we do have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but what is that going to do? Jesus says, bring them to me. Now, if you want to go over to, I don't want to do this too much, or we'll spend our whole class just on this section, but in John 6, we've talked before about Andrew the soul winner. All Andrew ever does, every time you're reading about him just about, is he's bringing people to Jesus, right? Sometimes it's bringing Greeks who want to see Jesus at the feast. In John 12, he brings his brother to Jesus, and his brother ends up being far more well-known than he. Who's his brother? Peter, right? Well, here in John's account, back up to verse 5 of John 6. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, he saw a great company coming to him. So he turns specifically, John tells us he addressed this to Philip. Where are we going to get bread to feed all these people? Reckon where we can go buy bread to feed all these people? Again, I've read that before and thought to myself, how'd you like to be in Philip's shoes there? Kind of go, I don't know. This he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do, verse 6 tells us. Jesus knows what he's doing. He's testing Philip. Philip says, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take even a little, basically is what he says. I mean, even 200 penny worth of bread, we couldn't even get everybody basically just a bite or so. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, there is a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? He says, look, I don't know how this helps, but if anybody could do something about it, Jesus, you can. And so he brings this young lad to Jesus. He's got 5 loaves, barley loaves. What's significant about that? Anybody remember this? It's not a huge significance, but barley as opposed to wheat just tells us barley was the poor man's wheat, basically. If you were broke as a joke, you didn't have much money, you made your bread with barley. It was more expensive to have wheat. So it may be that this young man was from a very poor family. It may be that just his mom was looking to send something quick with him. I don't know. But there's another detail here that John includes: 2 small fishes. Why do we take note of that? It's not any kind of, again, earth-shattering significance, but it's just something that would be noted. Why? What's John's occupation? He's a fisherman. He's going to tell you if it's a big fish or if it's a little fish. In fact, you get over to John 21, Jesus says, have you caught anything? No. Cast your nets on the other side. Well, we've toiled all the night, but that's your word. They cast the nets, and he says they brought up a net full of fish. They had to have help. The nets are breaking. And when they get to the shore, they realize they have 153 large fish. In other words, he says these weren't little sardines. These were whoppers. These were like the size you're going to mount on. It was a huge catch. But here, this little lad, he has 5 barley loaves and just 2 little fishes. Be like little sardines, something like that. So John points out that detail. That's interesting because, John being a fisherman, be more likely to notice something like that. So Jesus says, make them sit down. There was much grass in the place. Again, remember, it's not a desert like the Arizona desert or whatever. It's a deserted place. And so they sit down in number about 5,000. Now we go back over to Matthew 14. So verse 17, they have 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Again, this lad has brought them. We know that from John's account. So he says, well, bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. So we know from John's account, again, it came from a little boy. Mark tells us in his account, Jesus had the people sit in groups of 50 or 100. So he has them sit down, and this is interesting. I don't know that I'd ever really thought about this. This is in Papaw's notes, Reagan's dad, and obviously he had them sit in groups to give some order to the feeding process and make it easier to be sure everybody's fed. If you're just kind of going around and you got people scattered here, there, and everywhere, it's a lot harder to determine, have I gotten everybody? Has anybody covered this area over here? Well, if you got them sitting in companies, you may say to one of the apostles, you take the 3 groups over here, another one takes 3 groups over here, and so on. It just makes it a little easier, gives some order to the process, let all things be done decently and in order. 1 Corinthians 14:40. That's an instruction as it pertains to worship. But God, over and over again, we see is the God of order. And so you see that here with Jesus. But here's what I don't know that I had ever really given a lot of thought to. There's probably another reason for this. We're not told 100% for certain, but I think it certainly would make sense. Can anybody think of another logical reason for doing this? Can you imagine if you're there that day and you go home and you tell somebody and you say, maybe it was this lad, and he says, listen, we're out there, we're all hungry, Jesus is teaching, nobody wanted to leave, but we're all starving, and then all of a sudden he has us sit down and he just starts breaking the bread, and he's handing it to his disciples, and they just keep handing it out, and it just keeps going. And he's tearing it off, but it ain't going away. Mama, you remember what you sent with me, right? Yeah, honey, I sent with 5 loaves and those 2 fish. He just kept passing it out, and it just kept multiplying. And Mama, he fed 5,000 people. There was just 5,000 men. That's just counting the men. And mamas, what might you say at that point? Now, honey, settle down. You're excited. I get it. I doubt, seriously, it was 5,000 people. Mama, I'm telling you, it was 5,000. That's just the men. How do you know? I mean, are you just guessing at this number? Can you really be certain? You ever said something like that to your kids, mamas? because kids will tend to exaggerate, right? I don't know how young this lad was, but even just a grown man come back telling his friends about it, and they might say, kind of like, the one that got away. Sometimes we men will tell about the one that got away, and it just kind of grows and grows, and if you could have just seen this thing. Well, you could say then, Mama, or to your friend, buddy, let me tell you, he had them sitting in companies of 50s and 100s, and I could sit there, and I couldn't believe it myself either. And I sat there, and I'm counting, and sure enough, 5,000 just of the men. So probably there was something of that. Now, Matthew, when he writes it, obviously he's inspired by the Holy Spirit. He knows the exact number. But for somebody else who goes away and tells it, would that not make it easier for them to say, look, I'm not just throwing out a number here. You might go somewhere and say, oh, man, you should have been at the game the other night. I bet there were 10,000 people there. And somebody's going, really? Yes, sir. I can't imagine. Robert said, can you imagine the disciples' response? And, that's, Jesus keeps handing food, and they're like, and I don't know. Maybe they see this. They bring, Andrew brings this lad to Jesus, and maybe they're thinking, okay. And we know from other passages that even though they had seen him do miracles, it didn't always register, right? I mean, they're in a boat, and they've seen Jesus do miracles before, but they're scared to death. Do you not care that we're going to perish? And so over and over again, it's almost like it's just not quite sinking in. I don't know if that's the right phrase I want to use, but so I imagine they were probably pretty shocked, and Jesus just keeps, and he kind of like, he's tearing off the bread, but it's not going anywhere. And I don't know, understand we're getting into some speculation because the Bible doesn't tell us. In fact, some commentators it's kind of ridiculous the amount of time they'll spend talking about, did the bread multiply in his hand? Like he's holding a loaf and boom, it just becomes two, and he hands it, and then boom, it becomes two. Or is he tearing it off and he just keeps tearing, but it's not diminishing? Or did he hand it to them, a little tiny piece, and it grew? I don't know. But I tell you what, it was a genuine miracle, and nobody could deny it. And everybody was fed to the tune of 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. They all ate, verse 20. They were all filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Yes, sir.
Fascinating. Confirmation is what's happening through a miracle. We just left chapter 13 where Jesus is using parables. But then let us not forget in Matthew chapter 5, verse 6, he had preached a Sermon on the Mount. And he stated a spiritual statement that you're able to see physically here. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Here he's giving a visual image of that very concept. You're hungry, you're thirsty. I'm the bread of life.
And the irony is that's not what they're hungering and thirsting for. And when you get over to John's account, what they really wanted was food. And so when Jesus leaves, they're going to follow him, and he's going to tell them, you're not here because you saw a miracle. You're here because you want your bellies filled. In other words, you're not here because you're going, wow, this is the Christ. And so it is. It's a good point that, it's an illustration of what he says in the Sermon on the Mount, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, but they're hungering and thirsting for bread and fish and water. It's an interesting point there. So one of the things that sometimes we will point out, where is the miracle in what Jesus did? Has anybody ever fed 5,000 men before besides women and children? Sure. So what's the miracle here? Well, there actually is quite a bit. We mentioned already, he fed so many with so little food. If you and I had 5,000 people show up here, if we had 500 people show up here, maybe we're having our gospel meeting Sunday and 500 people show up. I dare say, even though we had announced it and told our ladies, hey, let's all make sure we bring plenty of food, I guarantee you we would be going, what are we going to do? Somebody's got to go to Hardee's or Grandma's or somewhere, and we got to get some more food because we know that's not going to be enough to feed even that many people. So that's That's part of the miracle, or at least I guess we could even maybe say, I'd say part of the one miracle. I don't know if I'd say multiple miracles here. Number two, we could say he fed them without preparing. He didn't say, everybody sit down and why don't y'all sing some songs and give me a few minutes. I'm going to whip up some more bread. Now, that would have been impressive if he could have done that in a relatively short period of time. But to do it just like that, well, that's a miracle. And that's part of the miracle here. So he feeds so many people with so little. He does it without preparation time. And not only that, it'd be one thing if, maybe this little lad's going home and he says, well, Mom, you're not going to believe this. Jesus, he multiplied this food and he fed the entire multitude. Only thing is, I just wish I could have had a little more to eat. I'm still hungry. Do we have anything to eat here? Now, this fellow goes home and he says, not only that, Mom, we were stuffed. In fact, we were so full, they're taking up fragments. They took up 12 baskets full of leftovers. And yeah, how big were the baskets? Who knows? And what'd they do with them? Now we really get into speculation, right? They take them to the shut-ins? I don't know. But he caused the food to multiply. He made enough for everybody there to eat. I think it's safe to say nobody's repeating that in our time, are they? We can feed a lot of people, but we're going to have time to prepare it. And depending on how much you got, you may have to say, look, everybody ration. I've been to, I remember being a starving teenager. They're always hungry. Maybe go to a youth day or something. And I remember one in particular we went to, and they were just kind of like I said, using the gospel meeting illustration, they were not expecting clearly that many people. And you go through the line and they're going, you get one piece of pizza. And we're all going like, what? Are you serious? So we left hungry. Nobody left on this occasion hungry. So it really is one of those just amazing things in the ministry of Jesus that, like so many other miracles, it's not that this one, it does stand out in one sense, but it also stands right with the other miracles that it should have left them going, wow, this is the Messiah. And it should have left them, as you mentioned, tying it in with the Sermon on the Mount, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, to hear more of Jesus' teaching. But again, to get into the book of John, when John 6, John records that they're just, Jesus calls them out on it. He says, you just want to get fed. You just want more food. And so when he starts giving some more instruction and teaching, and now they start saying, I think it's about verse 65, 66 of John 6, that they say, this is a hard saying. And it is in verse 66 where John records, from that time many of his disciples what? They walked no more with him. And of course that's when he's going to turn to the 12 and say, will you go away also? And Peter speaks up and says, to whom shall we go? But it's one of those things that just should have nailed it down with certainty, but again, we sometimes are slow to believe. Yes, sir.
I can't help but read this story and think back in 1 Kings chapter 17. Here you got a famine that's come on the land, no rain, and Elisha is told to go to the brook. The brook dries up, and then he's told to go to the widow woman's house. He goes, and she's gathering up sticks to make one final loaf of bread for her son and herself. He says, you make me a little cake first, and then you eat. She says, we're going to eat it and die. We're out of food. And she makes the cake, gives it to him. And the meal nor the oil ever ran out for seemed like, instead of many days, possibly a year or more. But notice this. You would have thought every time she went and got that meal, that it would have confirmed who Elisha was. But it is not until her son dies. He lays on him 3 times, and he arises that she says, true, you're the prophet of God. So what you see is humanity in these people that eat. And then they miss the whole point. Yeah. Kind of like the widow woman. For a year she went and continued to get meal. Where's it coming from? It's miraculously multiplying just like this bird.
And life is full of ebbs and flows in a literal sense, but also in a spiritual sense sometimes, even in our spiritual development and growth. Because I read that account with Elijah and the widow, and you think about, it took a lot of faith for her to, I mean, she's preparing the last meal, and he says, well, get me something first. And, you might be kind of like, if you're in her shoes, you might be like, go get your own. I mean, at least give us one last meal here, buddy. But she doesn't. She does it, but you're right. I mean, it's not running out, and you would think every time she goes and it's still there and it's not run out, she would go, wow, okay. But then later on, yeah, she says, well, now I know. It's like, now you know? So, yeah, and that's why I was going to say, before we're too hard on the people here, sometimes we're just as stubborn and slow to believe ourselves even to this very day. I kept mentioning in John's account, in John 6:26, they find Jesus on the other side of the sea. This is after walking on water, which we'll see next in Matthew 14. But when they come over there and they find him, they want to know, Rabbi, when did you come, or when camest thou hither? And Jesus says in verse 26 of John 6, verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled. And then, of course, he tells them, labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. And they go on to say, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? This is the work of God, Jesus said, that you believe on him whom he hath sent. So he tells them, look, it's not bad to be hungry for food, but hunger more for righteousness, which again ties in with what he said there on the Sermon on the Mount. In John's account in verse 14, it says, then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. Now, we've said this before. In John's account, the people sometimes will make a distinction between that prophet and the Christ. Moses said, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you like unto me. Unto him shall you hearken in all things. There is no such distinction in the Old Testament. The prophet Moses was talking about is the Messiah, the Christ. But sometimes in the book of John, you see the people, they get kind of confused. And they'll say, well, is he the Christ? Some people say, yeah, I think he's the Christ. Other people say, I don't know if he's the Christ, but I think he might be that prophet. Well, it's one and the same in the Old Testament. So some of them said, I think this is that prophet. This is of a truth that prophet. But look at verse 15. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. Now, sometimes we talk about this idea, this teaching called Premillennialism, and it's sort of a long-sounding name, but it's this idea that Jesus came intending to establish a kingdom on earth, and because he was rejected by the Jews, kind of had to go to plan B. He went to the cross, he established the church, and at some point he's going to come back, and he's going to set up a kingdom on earth. Listen, he had the people into a frenzy here after this feeding. If he wanted to establish a kingdom on earth, first of all, the very idea that God would want to do something and puny man would thwart the plans of God is blasphemous. But second of all, they want to take him at that point, after this miracle, they want to take him by force and make him a king. It's not so much talking about forcing him, although some commentators think that there is that idea, like they're saying, hey, you should be the king, come on. But it's the idea we're going to overthrow Roman rule. This is the Messiah, let's go. Because they have this idea of an earthly Messiah who's going to, restore physical Israel. When they start that, he retreats, he departs, because that's not what he's here for. He didn't come to earth to set up some kind of an earthly kingdom. He came to redeem humanity. And that required a sacrifice. It required blood. And it required the only blood that could atone for those sins. And so that's when he goes, and getting back to Matthew's account, 14:22 through 33, he's going to walk on water. He sends the multitudes away, goes up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Now, this is all kind of bang in Matthew's account here, but he's going to come to them, I don't know if Matthew's account, let me see if, fourth watch of the night, which, does anybody know about what time it is? Somewhere around 3 a.m. is when he's going to come to them. So We don't know exactly when the feeding was. It was sometime after what would be supper time when he fed them. So no doubt it took some time to distribute all the food to 5,000 men plus whatever women and children were there. They eat, they're filled, they take up the fragments. Probably easily what we would say dark 30, or maybe even getting on past that. The people go. Jesus tells his disciples, he constrained his disciples. I don't know, and people have speculated exactly why. Why did they not want to go? Or, why was he constraining them? Maybe they wanted to stay behind to, that may have been part of the whole, they want to take him by force and make him a king. Maybe the disciples were like, yeah, let's do this. And so Jesus says, no, go, you get into a ship. I'm going off away. This is not what I'm here for. That's Chad Dollahite's opinion. But the Bible just doesn't tell us ultimately exactly why he had to constrain them, as opposed to just saying, get into a boat. So they get into a ship and they go before him to the other side. He sends the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, then he's going to go and pray. So again, I don't know how long this is, how late this is into the night. I don't think it would be too late. But between here and 3 a.m. is when he's going to go and walk on the water coming to them. They're having a hard time though, right? Verse 24, it's tossed with the waves, the ship is, for the wind was contrary. And let me see. Go ahead, Tim, you're going to say something. I was looking for something. I'm trying to see if it's Matthew's account.
Interesting if you're a parent with children, whenever it's time to move on, most times you say to the children, y'all don't just hang around, y'all go get in the car. That's setting everything into motion where everybody understands we're busting up.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got 12 men standing around and you're trying to get them to, no, you got to take control and say, y'all go ahead and get it. Children, go get in the car. We're leaving.
Yeah. And that kind of seems like maybe that's what's going on here. Is he's y'all go and I'll deal with sending the multitudes away. Y'all go get in the boat. Go to the other side. And Jesus, he's always on the go, and he's never too busy to take time for people, but he also, of course, Jesus being the perfect man, our struggle sometimes is when to take more time to sit and visit a little bit longer versus when to say, I really got to go, got to move on, got somewhere else to be or whatever. Jesus always, of course, made the right choice with that, and that in itself is pretty amazing when you stop and consider it sometimes, because boy, that's a challenge, especially sometimes when you're out visiting and you just you want to visit for a long time, but you're trying to visit multiple people. And, it may very well be the situation here. I was looking, must be in Mark's account. Hang on. I look at these accounts sometimes side by side, and then I go to teach it, and I forget what's in which account. Okay, it must be John's account. Mark and John record this walking on water. As I told you just a moment ago, the people in John's account, they want to make him king by force. He departs into a mountain. And there it is in John's account, John 6:19, when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs. All that's just to say, they're having a tough time here, because the furlong is about 1/8 of a mile. So they had gone some 3, maybe 3.5 miles, and it's about 3 a.m. when Jesus comes to them. So in other words, they had not gone very far at all, because the wind is just, as Matthew says, contrary. Did I get that right? Is that Matthew's account? I'm going to mix accounts. One of them said that. How about that? The wind, it is Matthew 14:24. Yeah, the contrary wind. So blowing against it's what I've got a footnote in my Bible. So the fourth watch of the night, somewhere around 3 a.m., Jesus comes to them. He's walking on the sea. They don't know who it is. They're troubled, terrified. They think it's a spirit. They cry out for fear. Sometimes people say, why would they not recognize Jesus? I mean, did they not know Jesus? Hello, it's 3 a.m. So it's kind of dark outside, right? There are no street lights out there. They don't have their lights on the boat. So it's 3 a.m. Maybe they were lonely, and Jesus, sorry, that was pop culture reference there. But they don't recognize Jesus probably because it's dark. And number two, they don't expect to see Jesus there. They're not expecting him. So they're terrified. So Jesus comes walking on the water, and again, if they had expected to see Jesus, they would have expected to see him on the other side. Not just, maybe Jesus says, I'll meet you, I'll catch up with you later. If Jesus had said that to them, they don't think, I'll catch up to you walking on the sea later. So I have an idea any one of us would have been just right there with him, scared to death, if he came walking on the water and we saw that. So they cry out for fear. Jesus says, of course, be of good cheer. It is I, be not afraid. And Peter's answer is, Lord, if it's you, bid me come unto you. And I don't know that I understand that. Even still, I've thought about this so many times. Why does he say that? I understand why he would want to go to him, but he says, if it's you, bid me to come unto you. So if it was a spirit, the spirit wouldn't have bid him come? I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly, and I don't know that we can say for sure, but Jesus says, come. Maybe Peter's just sort of incredulous at this point. It's so hard to believe, they hear the voice, that's the familiar voice, but he's kind of going, if it's really you, tell me to come to you. Maybe he thinks, am I imagining things? I don't know. But he says, come. Peter gets out of the ship, and, we pointed out before, everybody's so hard on Peter because, he walks on the water to go to Jesus. He sees the wind boisterous. He's afraid, and he starts to sink, and he cries out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand, caught him, and says, O thou little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And, man, sometimes we give it to Peter, don't we? Oh, lacking in the faith. But, yeah, who else got out of the boat, folks? No, nobody else got out of the boat. Nobody else volunteered to go walking on the water to Jesus. And when he started to sink, he knew who to go to for help. Lord, save me. He cried out to Jesus. So, he gets a mild rebuke from Jesus. Why did you doubt? In other words, I'm right here with you. Why are you focusing on all this instead of not focusing on me? And when we go through storms, do we not do the same thing sometimes? I'm not talking about physical storms. I'm talking about the storms of life. And we get so caught up with all this that's going on around us, and we can lose our focus, get our attention off of Jesus. I was trying to look at what Papo had in his notes. I really like what he said. He said, in the beginning, when he was keeping his eyes on Jesus, there was no problem. But when he began to pay attention to the wind and the storm, he was afraid and began to sink. Why was he afraid? Well, Jesus says it was because he was of little faith. And again, it's a mild rebuke. I don't think it would be anything akin to what you see when Jesus speaks to the Pharisees and sometimes other folks. But he did. He lacked faith, at least in some measure, and he doubted. And again, that happens to us, doesn't it? Sometimes we lack faith, we doubt, and we start to sink, as it were. But with our eyes on Jesus, and when we maintain that forward progress, marching design, as we sometimes sing, the affairs, the problems of this life won't hinder us. But if our eyes wander, if our attention falters, then the problems and the suffering, the trials in this life will cause fear. And so where is our faith? We've got to get our faith in Jesus, keep our eyes on him. And of course, Peter cries for the Lord to save him. What's the reaction of the apostles after Jesus gets into the ship? They're awestruck. They fall down. They worship Jesus. They confess him as God's Son. Why did they conclude that Jesus truly is the Son of God? In fact, when they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. Verse 32, 33 says, they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, and they said, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. What made them conclude that? Did they get a warm, fuzzy feeling and really just feel it in their heart? Evidence. They had the evidence. And they said, you truly are the Son of God. You have your hand up?
Peter said, Lord, if it be you, bid me come and meet you. Does he reckon? Remember, there's a storm raging, and I think there's evidence of what I'm about to say. There's a storm raging. Do you think Peter knew how to swim being a fisherman? He starts to sink, and what does he say? Lord, save me. Do you think he's ever been in the water being a fisherman? Do you think this storm may be so intense that, oh wow, nobody needs to be out here? So is the storm obscuring the view where he said, Lord, if it be you? It appears to be. And then the evidence in my mind for that is he's in the water and he's asking Jesus to save him. He's a fisherman, for crying out loud. Just swim back to the boat.
Yeah, it's
Why didn't he?
It's quite a storm.
Because of the storm.
And just the short distance they've gone in so much time tells you that. It was no joke. Kind of like in the book of Jonah. You know, these experienced mariners, and they're terrified. You know that's a big storm. So, putting John, Mark, and putting John's, Mark's, and Matthew's accounts together, this is an occasion where you do have multiple miracles. Why do we say that? Well, miracle number one is what? Jesus walks on the water out to them. That kind of doesn't happen naturally, does it? I mean, surely you don't need me to tell you that, right? I'll say that before.
He alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. That's a fulfilled prophecy.
Never noticed that before. Anybody else got a reference to Job there?
In verse 26, there's a reference to Job chapter 9, verse 8.
Verse 26, reference to Job. Would you say 9?
Yep. Verse 8.
9, verse 8. I've never caught that before. How about that? Which alone spreadeth out the heavens and treadeth upon the waves of the sea.
There you go.
How about that? So yeah, it seemed to be a fulfilled prophecy there. Interesting. What's miracle number 2? Peter walked on the water. But there's a third miracle. Oh yeah, you're getting ahead of me, Jimmy. I've got that as number 4. Well, it doesn't matter necessarily what order we're in. As soon as he gets in the boat, the storm stops. This storm had been going, and apparently been going for some time, because they've been laboring with it. It didn't just blow up all of a sudden. All this time's passed. They've only gone 3.5 miles. It's a big storm. Jesus walks on water, Peter walks on water, and then, of course, just in the ship, boom, it's done. But then John tells us the fourth one, which Jimmy mentioned just a moment ago, and that is also as soon as it gets in the boat, the ship is at the shore. Yeah, I mean, they're trying, they're laboring, they can't get this thing to go very far because the wind is contrary, again, as Matthew put it. Jesus gets in the boat, boom, there. Don't you wish you had him on some of your family trips? I mean, can you imagine? Sometimes I always tell people the return trip is the worst, isn't it? I mean, it's sometimes when you're going on vacation or something, or you're going to this fun trip. The trip up there is full of anticipation. We're going to have so much fun, and then you go, and you have a lot of fun, good time, and it's like back to the real life, the grind, all that. And so it's like that trip home was like, man, wouldn't it be nice? Just somebody says, hey, could I mind if I ride along? Sure. And they sit down, boom, you're home. I thought it was nice to fly home once from a trip and, cut off that time. But boy, that's taking it to the next level, isn't it? And then 34 through 36, I was hoping to get through Matthew 14. I was debating if I wanted to go into Matthew 15 or not, but I guess we'll put that off. Obviously, since we're down to less than 5 minutes. This is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. They've crossed over, of course, as John's account records, as soon as he gets in the boat. They're on that western shore, the land of Gennesaret, and Jesus heals the sick. And we're not told a whole lot from Matthew's account. When they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. The men of that place had knowledge of him. They send everybody out. They bring to him all these people that are diseased, And they beseech him or besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And many as touched were made perfectly whole. Neither Matthew nor Mark give details about the healings there, just kind of a general statement. But we're reminded of the woman with an issue of blood in Matthew chapter 9. She just touched his garment, and she's healed. And that's what happens with these people. And she knew that if she could just but touch the hem of his garment, she would be made whole. And same thing here. Even if they touched his garment, they were made perfectly whole. So we'll stop there. Next week, I'm excited about our annual Thanksgiving prayer and song service. That's always good. We got several young men and some that are not as young that will be reading scripture, leading singing. And so that's always a wonderful time to worship God in prayer and song. So we'll be doing that next week. And then, Lord willing, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll pick up Matthew chapter 15, verse 1. Thank you very much.